Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Asus Zenbook UX305UA. It's a thin and light laptop, weighs about 2.9 pounds, measures about 0.6 inches thick, sells for about $750, but it has the kind of hardware you'd expect from a probably more expensive notebook, including a Core i5 Skylake processor, a 13-inch Full HD display, 8 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigabytes of storage, and an all-metal design. Now, it's in the UX305 budget line of ultrabooks, and the first models in that series had Core M low-power processors and starting prices around $700. This model sells for about $50 more and has a full Core i5 processor, which means that generally, in terms of performance, is about twice as fast and still seems to get pretty similar battery life. So it's a pretty nice value. It's lacking a couple of features that you might find on a more expensive notebook. The keyboard is not backlit, and it doesn't have a touchscreen display, and I'm not in love with the touchpad. But generally speaking, for $750, it's really not bad, especially if you can find it for a lower price, because sometimes these things go on sale. And that's sort of the biggest caveat here, is that Asus does have some slightly more expensive models that are sometimes on sale for very similar prices to this model. But that said, at the list price, I think it's a pretty nice notebook, and I'll show you a little bit about what it can do. So first, let's take a quick look at the design. You can see it is pretty thin here. We've got a headset jack, a full-size USB port. There's not really room for a full-size HDMI port, so we have this compact one, and you need a special adapter to use that. There's the power jack, and on the other side, 2 more full-size USB ports and an SD card slot, and that's pretty much it. There's no Ethernet jack, and unlike the model that I reviewed in 2015, which came with a USB to Ethernet adapter, this one does not come with an adapter. You can buy one separately. They don't cost very much, but it does not have one included. Speakers, which are reasonably loud and clear if you're sitting right in front of the device. I found that if you sort of go a little bit off-center, the sound might get a little bit tinny. You won't hear a lot of bass. And if you're sitting with this on your lap in a way that your legs are sort of right underneath the speakers, the audio could get a little bit muffled. There is a fan. It has a 15-watt processor, so unlike the version with a 4.5-watt Core M processor, which is fanless, there is a fan, but it's a relatively quiet fan. And you'll notice there's also screws here around the sides of the case. These are special Torx screws, so you'll need that kind of screwdriver to get them out, and then you would need to take off these rubber feet to get 4 Phillips head screws if you wanted to open up the case. If you did that, you'd notice that the only thing that's really replaceable is the solid-state drive, because like most laptops, the processor is not easily removable, but also the RAM is soldered to the motherboard. So it's nice that it comes with 8 gigabytes as opposed to 4 or 2 or less. So let's go ahead and take a look at the keyboard here. Island-style keyboard, decent spacing between the keys. I find typing is reasonably comfortable. The biggest issue I have is the placement of the power button. Normally, on a laptop, you would find it sort of off to the side or up above the keyboard. Here, it's where I'd expect the delete key to be, so I found myself accidentally putting the computer to sleep a number of times during the first week that I was using it. After a little while, I started to get used to it, but I'm still, after about 2 weeks of testing, kind of, instead of automatically going to the delete key when I want to hit delete, I'm looking down at my hands to make sure I hit the right button. Over time, you can probably get used to it, but switching back and forth between, say, your work computer and this laptop, it could get a little disconcerting, I think, because that is a weird placement. It also is the only key that has an indicator light on it, other than the caps lock key here. So let's go ahead and press that button and turn the computer on. Now, it has a reasonably fast processor, reasonably fast solid-state storage, but for some reason it takes a little bit longer to boot than some Windows laptops that I've tested. But once you get to this boot screen, the rest of it goes pretty quickly. And so we've got Windows 10. Let me go ahead and log into my account. And from here, I'll show you one thing real quick. There is an ambient light sensor, so it can automatically adjust your screen brightness, or you can disable that if you want to be able to control it manually. So we're connected to the internet. We've got 802.11ac Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and just go ahead and load up a web browser here so I can show you a couple of things. Okay, I think I unintentionally showed you one thing that I really wanted to focus on, which is that the touchpad I found can be a little bit inconsistent, so that at times you think you tapped something, you wait, and then you realize that you hadn't actually tapped anything, so you have to sort of go through and do that again. Generally speaking, scrolling works okay, but I could be a little bit happier with a touchpad that worked better, especially considering it also doesn't have much palm rejection, so sometimes as you're typing, the cursor will move because your palm sort of swipes. So don't love the touchpad. Most of the time when I'm doing heavy-duty work on this laptop, though, I plug in a mouse or I connect a wireless mouse, so it's not really that much of an issue, but it is something to be aware of, and it could take a little getting used to. So two-finger scrolling works. In order to do that, this is not what's considered a precision touchpad, so two-finger tapping doesn't always work. There we go. So you have to use this Asus Smart Gesture utility. So if you wanted to enable reverse scrolling, two-finger, three-finger gestures, and other things, you need to use the Asus utility. Speaking of which, there's not a lot of bloatware on this computer, which is nice. There's a couple of programs from Asus, and it does come with a free trial of Microsoft Office, which I uninstalled, but it doesn't have antivirus software or some of the other things that you often see. But we've got the Asus Splendid utility for adjusting the display, that gesture manager, and not much else really, just a couple of other little things. So let's go ahead and load up a video. One thing you might notice here is that it's a matte display, which means that not only are you not seeing my reflection in the screen because it's not glossy and doesn't really work like a mirror, but even in fairly bright sunlight, you don't get a lot of glare. Now, some people might think that the screen colors don't look quite as bright or vibrant with a matte screen, but I prefer being able to use it in well-lit environments like this without having to worry about it shining back at me. Let's go ahead and play a video. Now, you know what? This one's only 720p. Let's do a 1080p video. And you should have the hardware here really to handle 4K video. Not that you have a 4K screen, but it's nice to have the option. So in terms of performance, I think it handles video well. It can handle some gaming duties. It's not going to be a high-end gaming machine, obviously, but it should be able to handle older titles or things that aren't necessarily super graphically intense. But in terms of gaming and CPU benchmarks, as I mentioned, it's about twice as fast as a model with a Core M processor. It's one of the first Skylake-based systems that I've tested, but for a 15-watt chip, it's pretty high performance, and it does a very fast job at things like transcoding audio and video files and other things that I regularly do as a blogger and video producer and audio producer. So you can find more details about those benchmarks as well as 3D mark results at Liliputing.com, and there's a link in the description of this video if you're watching it somewhere other than at Liliputing.com. So that's sort of a look at the Windows performance. It gets around 6 to 7 hours of battery life, I would say, under the way that I typically use it, which generally involves using the Chrome web browser, which I know is not the most energy efficient, but, opening lots of browser tabs at the same time, doing multi-window. And you can see the performance, seems pretty good. It loads things pretty quickly, doesn't really slow down. This is not exactly how I would normally work, but is a rough approximation. And I think the 8 gigs of RAM in the Core i5 processor works pretty nicely. Now, another thing is that you can install other operating systems if you're not a big fan of Windows 10. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down and show you that. I've got Ubuntu 16.04 Mate Edition on this flash drive. And I'm just going to hit the power button and escape to get to the boot menu. Pretty sure I hit the power button. All right. And we're just going to choose the USB flash drive and try without installing. Show you the power adapter while we wait for that. It's relatively compact. So again, I mentioned I get around 6 to 7 hours of battery life. Depending on what you're doing, you might be able to get more. But I find that it's nice to have this slightly larger than a typical cell phone charger. So it doesn't really take up a lot of space or weigh you down very much if you wanted to take it with you. At laptop under 3 pounds, being able to get around 6 or 7 hours of battery life is not quite all day, but depending on what it is that you're doing, you can take it to a coffee shop or take it on the go or on a flight, but then it doesn't take a lot of extra effort to put that adapter in your bag. So again, this is Ubuntu Mate. This is running from the flash drive, and you can see that the mouse works. Wi-Fi should work. And audio works. Has to do some of the shortcuts like volume.
Imagine you're looking at a laptop computer. Now shrink that picture in your head, and you've basically got an idea of what the Dragonbox Pyro looks like. I'm Brad Linder.
So alternate operating systems work reasonably well, depending on the operating system. There is an option to disable secure boot. You don't need to do that in order to run Ubuntu, but for some operating systems you might need to. In that case, when you're turning on the computer, instead of hitting escape, you would just hit the F2 button. But in this instance, we didn't need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. And just to sum up, that's the Asus Zenbook UX305UA, which is an all-metal laptop. Weighs about 2.9 pounds, measures 0.6 inches thick, sells for about $750 at launch, and has the kind of hardware that you'd typically expect from a more expensive computer, including 8 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigabytes of storage. Now, there are other thin and light laptops in that price range, but not usually with that much memory and that much storage, and I think that's something that really makes this stand out. Now, at the time that I'm doing this review, for $50 more, you can get a UX303, which has a touchscreen glossy display, and a backlit keyboard for about $50 more, but that model normally sells for about $150 more. So on sale, you might be able to beat this price, but having a list price of $750, I think, makes this pretty special, especially considering that's only $50 more than the model with a Core M processor, and you get much, much better performance here. The Core M version is fanless, so if that matters to you and you'd prefer to have a fanless system, then you can save $50. But I think the performance is pretty nice here, and again, while there is a fan, I don't find it to be particularly noisy. So that is a video review of the Asus Zenbook UX305UA, which is kind of a long name now that I tried to say it out loud. But it's a pretty nice laptop for $750. You can find more details, pictures, benchmark results, and other links and information at Liliputing.com. This is Brad Linder.